Hello and welcome to the second set of notes in the social psychology unit on social influence. Make sure that you have your notes linked below at my Teachers Pay Teachers tour, and let's go ahead and get started. So what is social influence? Well, what we're going to be talking about in this video is how the actions of others shape the way that we as individuals think and behave. So both of those two things, right? So first we have to consider social roles. And we kind of talked about this in the last video. So make sure that you really watch that, particularly about Phil Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. So social roles being the socially defined patterns, all about how we interact with other people, those patterns of behavior that are expected of people in a given setting or group. So social roles are expectations of behavior. The roles you assume may actually result from your interests, your abilities, and goals, or they may be imposed on you by the group or by culture, economic or biological conditions that are beyond your control. So think of the way you were born and who you were born to. In any case, social roles prescribe your behavior by making obvious what you should do, how you should do it, and when. So again, it prescribes your behavior, meaning determining what you should do, right? And how often and when. So again, make sure you looked back in the notes from the last video and really think about how social roles and the situation as explained by Phil Zimbardo in the Stanford prison experiment impact our daily lives and the different situations that we find ourselves in. So social norms, another vocab term that we really need to make sure that we define here, is a group's expectations regarding what is appropriate and acceptable for its members' attitudes and behaviors, right? So the social role is like the position that we assume or that we are in, and then the norms are those expectations regarding what you should and shouldn't do in that role. So this can be broad guidelines like political or religious views and policies, or they can be quite specific, like being quiet in a library, right? Like that's a rule, right? A social norm. It can also guide conversation. What is acceptable to discuss? It can define dress code. In most offices, you have to wear like business attire, not t-shirts and shorts. And some places they're real specific on no open-toed shoes, something like that. But they could also be unwritten rules built into various situations, like when a teacher is lecturing, students are to listen and not talk simultaneously, right? Like that's kind of the expectation. So I've given an example here of a handshake, right? As a social norm, or how you greet someone in different cultures is a norm based off of that culture, and that some shake hands, some bow, and even within many cultures, at least in Western ones, right? Like there's different ways to shake hands for different people and different groups and settings. Conformity and obedience, and that continuum is really important as we kind of continue in our discussion here, in that behavior is contagious, right? So modeled by one and followed by another, and that we follow behavior of others to conform. But there's like a spectrum there, from conformity being the smallest kind of guidance of our behavior, being all the way up to obedience, which is someone is telling you to behave a certain way. So let's talk about something that's called the chameleon effect, which I guess is just another way for you to think about conformity, right? In that you adjust your behavior, which oftentimes is the way you look, right? In the case of a chameleon, they change their color to match their background and the setting they're in. Well, conformity is the same way, but for humans. So adjusting one's behavior or thinking to coincide with a group standard and the way that things are in the setting and the situation that you find yourself, based off of how others are behaving. And it's important to make a note here that Zimbardo's experiment was not on conformity. Zimbardo's experiment was on social norms and expectations of behavior, whereas conformity is very much about the other people in the room, their behavior, and you conforming to it. Okay, so the next big experiment or study we're going to talk about is Solomon Asch's line study. He conducted a famous line experiment where he set out to test the levels of conformity. So here's kind of what he did. He had participants in a room, one participant at a time, sitting at a table with 9 other people, but those 9 people were pseudo participants, right? Or confederates. They were actors. And he presented an image on, let's say, like the board, right? Projected an image like this or had it on a poster or something like that, where he said, here is our example line. Now, what line in length does this best match? Line A, B, or C? Well, very obviously, the answer is C, right? But all 9 of the actors, the confederates, answered wrong. But they answered the same way. So let's just say that they went with A. So obviously it is not A, but all 9 of them answered A. So then they got to the 10th person, and that's, right, they were measuring how are they going to answer. If they answered A, they conformed, right? And then they asked them afterwards, did you know that option A, what you answered, was wrong? And they said, yes, of course I knew it was wrong in most cases. And then they asked, so then why did you answer it? Because I thought I was missing something. Everyone else in the room did. So I thought, well, I'm not going to be that guy who doesn't answer the way everyone else does. And so they acknowledge I answered wrong, and I did it because of other people in the room. So when you're answering a question about lines, that really doesn't have a big impact on you. But have you ever heard your parents say, just because everyone else is jumping off a bridge doesn't mean that you should too? Right? Like that's the other extreme of the spectrum of conformity. So it's really interesting. So about 1/3 of the participants regularly conform to the unanimous but erroneous group answer. It's important to note that it's unanimous because that really has an impact on conformity, with an average of 75% of all participants conforming at least once. So you're probably thinking to yourself, or have at some point in your life thought, okay, I would not do that. And 75% of you would be wrong. And in fact, each one of you saying, no, I wouldn't do that, are really underestimating the power of these social psychology trends and phenomenons. Don't say to yourself that I won't succumb to these things, because you will. But in having this knowledge and being exposed to these terms and these concepts and ideas, it helps you, right? It gives you an advantage so that if you're in a situation where other people are doing things that you know is incorrect or morally wrong, you can notice, maybe I should check this, right? Like, I don't want to be like that. I have some principles that guide me, and that I want to have the right answer. So let's talk about the conditions that influence conformity. These 4 are really important. The size of the group is actually really important. The more the people, the more likely one is to conform. In fact, kind of the number cutoff is 3, and that if there's more than 3 people, the conformity increases. The status of the group is important, and Asch actually did a bunch of variations on the study where the people in the room, the confederates, were either above or below the social status of each of the participants and kind of measured what happened then. So the lower a person's status in the group, the more likely they are to conform. So if I'm in a room of all doctors, right, and I somehow know whether they're all wearing their white coats or they each introduce themselves and say, I'm Dr. Smith, I'm Dr. Bob, whatever, I'm more likely to conform because I'm a teacher, right? Like, and they are doctors. Observation of the group. If the decision is made in private and anonymous, they're less likely to conform. So this was important in Asch's experiment because the participants were all in the room together, right? It's not like, I don't know, it's kind of an older show, but on Survivor, they go off and make their decisions in private, right? So therefore, they don't conform, they make their own decisions. And then unanimity of the group. This is being anonymous. Conformity is greater when all in the group agree. So it's really important that all 9 of the pseudo patients answered one way. They all answered A or B, whichever the other wrong one was, right? And that even if one of them answered differently, conformity significantly drops. So then there's some reasons for conformity. There's normative and informative, and it's important to know that these are confusing and then try your best to delineate them. So normative is you want to avoid rejection or gain social approval. So we respect the norms of the group, right? We do what the group does because it's what they do, and I want to be part of that group. Informative social influence is due to the fact that the group may provide valuable information, we want to accept the opinions of others, especially when it comes to tough decisions that we make in life. So we don't want to stand alone in tough decisions. So an example I came up with for normative influence, let's say that, I don't know, your dad or you or somebody you know has a weekly golf buddies golf group, right? Have you ever wondered why everyone who golfs dresses the same? I mean, I'm pretty sure they would be more comfortable if they were wearing some joggers and not a polo, right? Just like a dry fit t-shirt or something. But hey, it's part of what they do. They want acceptance of the buddies at the golf group and the golf club, so they go with it. Informative social influence, the big one that I could think of is that really all decisions around money are tough decisions. So if you have a group that you respect for whatever reason, and you're wanting to kind of know some guidance on how to spend your money, when not to spend your money, blah, 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 what to buy, what not to buy, you're going to ask them for guidance. Well, what did you go with? Or, how much do you save and spend and blah, blah, blah. So that's just kind of an example I came up with. Another big one that's probably applicable for most of you watching this video is school, right? Colleges. And that you don't necessarily conform, but you ask important groups. Even people at the school already, right? You ask them, why did you choose this? And so that's really informing you on your decision. Compliance. So please remember that on our continuum, right, we've got compliance, conformity, obedience. Compliance is similar but different to conformity. You're just adjusting your behavior based on a request that is either explicit or implicit. So an explicit request is direct. Will you do this, please? Implicit is more indirect. So indirect requests could include asking for or implying something else, often used by a salesperson or a politician. So think of a car salesman, right? They don't come to you and say, will you buy this car? I guess they might in a commercial or something. But it's more implicit and look at how great it is, right? You really want this, and look, we can get you these deals, right? It's more indirect requests. And then finally on that continuum is obedience, and that one changes your behavior in response to an authority figure, right? A command of someone who's in a position of authority. Could be a police officer, right? A law enforcement officer. It could be a leader in a group of your government. It looks like lots of different things. So our last experiment, there are 3 huge ones that you really have to know for this unit, and the last one is Milgram's shock experiment. So Stanley Milgram, he designed a study that investigated the effects of authority on obedience. And I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as possible. I do have a video that if you were to purchase these slides, you can see that video. But I highly recommend you look it up online. Okay, here it is. So we've got 3 people in a room, okay? The participant is the quote teacher. And this image over here kind of shows that to you. The participant, the one that we are studying, is the teacher. And then there is a student. The student is an actor. The teacher, the participant, does not know that the student is an actor. But then in the room with the teacher is an experimenter, right? Okay, so in walks the participant and another pseudo-confederate, pseudo-participant. They walk in the room and the experimenter says, we are going to study the effects of punishment on learning. So there is some deception there. We are going to study the effects of punishment on learning. So you each are going to essentially draw a number, and a 1 is the teacher, a 2 is the student. Well, the actual participant is always the teacher. And then they have the actor get hooked up to essentially a shocking machine, for lack of a better word. And the teacher is observing the student get hooked up to this. And then they go into another room. And the teacher sits down in front of a machine that looks like this in the center image. And each one of these little like tick marks is a little like switch, like a light switch, with an increased amount of voltage. So the teacher reads a set of word patterns to the student, and the student has to repeat it. If the student gets it wrong, the teacher, the participant, gives them a shock. So it's not about the effects of punishment on learning. It's how far will this participant go in electrocuting, right? And electrically shocking, that's not the right way to say it. It's electrocuting someone else simply because someone in the room who appears to be an authority figure tells them to. This is probably the most intriguing study to me. And it's because of the results, really. So Milgram says, I'm going to do this experiment. And he goes to all of his colleagues and says, how many people do you think you're going to go all the way? And I'm kind of like giving you a spoiler alert here because in the video they talk about this. His colleagues said 0.1%. Like almost next to no one is going to go all the way. Simply because a guy in a white lab coat tells them to electrocute someone. No, they're not going to do that. People are better than that. Well, guess what? 65%, these are the results that you should be writing down. 65% of the participants didn't just do it once. They went all the way. I believe the highest shock value was 450 volts. Like certain death, right? Like your body can't handle that much. It's important for you to think about why. Not necessarily why would people do that, but why Milgram wanted to do this study. Well, his parents were Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany in World War II. And so he wanted to know, why did so many people not just stand by, but why did so many Nazi soldiers just say yes to killing millions of people, right? Because it wasn't just, here, kill these people. It was first, let's humiliate them, and then let's tag them. Let's have them visibly identifiable so we can humiliate them some more. Then it's, let's intern them, let's confine them. And then, and there's also the steps of experimenting and torturing, right? And then it's to exterminate, essentially. And so Milgram's motivation was very, very serious. And I think that's why I find this experiment so intriguing, is because we're all human and we are all impacted by authority and by obedience. So what says that we won't go all the way when 65% of these participants did? Super duper important you get those results. And that wraps up our second set of notes. Make sure that you catch the next video. We've got a couple, I think about 3 more in the social psychology unit. I hope this was helpful, and everybody have a great day.